Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The dust of forward operating base Nightingale clung to everything, a fine ochre powder that sank into skin and rifles and the very taste of breath. In this valley, the graveyard of empires, the air was always heavy, the silence always waiting. Master Sergeant Alina Rostova had lived long enough to understand that silence was never empty. It listened. It remembered. She moved quietly through it, a shadow among soldiers too young to see the weight in her step. At 58, her body carried the echoes of hard landings and harder winters. Her hair was pulled tight in a regulation bun that revealed the age and the iron beneath it. Her posture looked tired to anyone who didn't understand endurance. But she wasn't tired. She was waiting. The men of Cerberus' squad didn't wait. They strutted. Their laughter rang like hollow bravado through the thin mountain air. They were the kind of soldiers who looked immortal until the world reminded them they were. Rostova, clipboard in hand, was invisible to them, just a logistics NCO, a glorified quartermaster, a clerk surrounded by crates and data pads. They didn't see the precision in how she stacked each crate, or the small notations in her margins that spoke of an instinct sharpened over a lifetime of surviving other people's mistakes. Sergeant Cade Miller, call sign Aries, passed her on his morning jog, sweat darkening the chest of his shirt. He looked like a recruitment poster that had learned to smirk. "Morning, Sergeant," he said with mock respect, "making sure we've got enough paper clips for the big dance." The laughter that followed was the kind of cheap noise that comes easy to the confident. Rostova didn't bother to look up. Her thumb scrolled the screen, eyes flicking over ammunition lot numbers. "Your sidearm ammo, Miller," she murmured, voice calm, almost detached. "Lot number 7B4 Delta. It was recalled 2 weeks ago for inconsistent powder loads." He blinked. She continued without pausing, "I've replaced it. You're welcome." That small flicker of authority, that quiet reminder, punctured the arrogance in the air like a pin in a balloon. Miller forced a laugh, but it came out brittle. Rostova didn't notice. Or maybe she did. She walked away, the dust swallowing her small frame as if she'd never been there. They saw gray hair and wrinkles and assumed fragility. What they missed was the way her eyes kept scanning the ridgelines, reading the terrain, judging sightlines, wind direction, angles of approach, all with a sniper's silent ritual. She didn't see a mountain. She saw ranges of fire, exfil points, kill zones. It was instinct, not habit. It never left you, not even after you promised yourself you were done with the rifle. Her nights were longer than anyone else's on the base. Long after the last jokes faded from the mess tent, she worked under a single bulb that buzzed with dying electricity. Her corner of the supply depot was immaculate, every item logged, every route marked. But her true focus wasn't the paperwork. It was the map beneath it, a topographical scan layered with weather charts, fuel rates, and something else no one had asked her to check: old smuggler routes and erosion data. To the untrained, it was logistics. To her, it was survival. That's when she saw it, the flaw. A red line across the digital map. A bridge, a gorge, a route labeled Viper. On paper, it was efficient. On the ground, it was suicide. She marked it silently and waited for morning. The next day's heat pressed down like judgment. The briefing room was a plywood box, stinking of sweat, coffee, and nerves. Inside, General Verne Vance stood before a glowing map, his broad shoulders casting long shadows on the wall. He was a man carved from rank and conviction, every word soaked in authority. His voice was thunder in a closed space. "All right, listen up," he barked, gesturing at the map. "Operation Serpent's Tooth. Objective is the recovery of a high-value scientist, codenamed Prometheus, held in a fortified compound here." His finger stabbed the holographic red dot. "Intel says minimal security, local militia, a walk in the park." The men of Cerberus' squad grinned. Their pride was the kind that comes before gravity reminds you which way is down. General Vance smiled back. He saw them as his war dogs, elite, aggressive, unstoppable. His eyes passed over Rostova without pause, the way one glances over a chair. Insertion by helicopter before dawn. Exfil along Route Viper. Ground convoy to LZ 60 clicks west. Fast and clean. Rostova stood still, hands clasped behind her back. Her chest tightened. She could hear the bridge creaking in her head, the ghost of steel under too much weight. "General," she said quietly. The words seemed to slice the air. Heads turned. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a gravity that stilled the room. Vance turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "Master Sergeant." She pointed at the holographic map. "The bridge at Checkpoint 7, en route Viper, its load rating is 10 tons. 2 MRAPs and a support truck equal 25. Satellite imaging from this morning shows erosion on the eastern abutment. The bridge won't hold, sir." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then a ripple of smirk spread through the room. Vance's lips twitched into something colder than a smile. "The intel on that bridge is 6 months old, Sergeant. It's fine. I trust my tactical planners." "With respect, sir," she replied evenly, "hydrology isn't an opinion, it's physics. The bridge is a death trap." The silence thickened. The general stepped closer, towering over her. "Are you questioning my command?" "I'm presenting a logistical analysis to prevent mission failure and loss of life." Her voice never shook. It was calm, almost too calm. That calm irritated him. He wanted to break it. A cruel grin split his face. "You've got a lot of opinions for a supply clerk. What do they call you down in logistics? The crate counter, boxcar Betty." Laughter erupted. Soldiers elbowed each other like schoolboys. Miller leaned back in his chair, smirking. Rostova didn't blink. "Master Sergeant Rostova is sufficient, sir." The quiet in her tone, that small refusal, made the laughter die faster than any order could. But Vance wasn't finished. He waved his hand dismissively. "Route Viper stands. Cerberus, you have your orders." He walked out. No one followed immediately, the kind of silence that stays when respect has just been murdered. As the room emptied, Miller paused beside her. "Nice try, Grandma," he murmured, breath sour with arrogance. "Stick to your spreadsheets. Leave the real work to us." Rostova didn't respond. She only looked at him, one slow, unblinking glance that made him feel something he couldn't name. Then she returned to her data pad, her fingers already moving. She plotted the alternate path she knew they'd ignore. The old service road winding through broken terrain, rough, slow, safe. She marked refuel points, fallback coordinates, even extraction markers. No one had asked her to. She did it anyway. Because preparation wasn't obedience, it was foresight. In a locked container labeled archived meteorological equipment, she keyed a code only she knew. The doors hissed open. Inside lay a weapon older than most of the men she worked with, a rifle wrapped in care and silence. A relic, a promise. Her hands hovered over it, fingers tracing the steel like an old memory. She exhaled softly. Then she closed the container and walked away. The next morning the mission launched under violet dawn. Helicopters sliced through thin air, carrying the confident, the untested, the doomed. Rostova stood on the tarmac, eyes to the horizon, her clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield against what she already knew would come. She watched until the noise faded into the distance, swallowed by mountains. Then she returned to her corner of the base and sat at her desk, eyes fixed on the blinking tracker that represented Cerberus' squad. A red dot moving west, toward the gorge, toward the bridge. She whispered under her breath, not prayer, not curse, just a line of cold acknowledgement. "They'll learn today." And then she went back to work, checking readings, monitoring seismic sensors, waiting for the moment when the silence would finally break. Because deep down, Alina Rostova had never really retired from the field. She just changed her weapon, numbers instead of bullets, maps instead of missions. But she still fought the same war against arrogance, ignorance, and the cruelty of command that never learned to listen. Outside, the sun climbed higher. The base stirred with life. But inside that small tent filled with the hum of electronics and the smell of coffee, one woman already knew that somewhere out there, a bridge was waiting to collapse, and with it, everything that made men believe they were untouchable. She adjusted her earpiece, sipped her coffee, and muttered quietly to herself, a whisper that carried more weight than an order ever could. Let's see if you're ready for the math of war. The wind outside shifted, sweeping through the desert, carrying dust and fate in equal measure. Why did the silence on the radio feel heavier than the desert itself? At first, everything went according to plan. Cerberus' squad fast-roped into the valley before sunrise, moving like the ghosts they fancied themselves to be. The pre-dawn air was thin, dry, and brittle, the kind of air that held its breath before tragedy. The compound came into view, half buried in dust and stone. They breached it with choreographed violence, flashbangs, door charges, short bursts of suppressed fire. Within 15 minutes, the mission was textbook, minimal resistance. One terrified scientist secured. No casualties, no surprises. See, Sergeant Cade Miller laughed into the comms, adrenaline cutting through his voice. Told you, walk in the park. Back at the base, General Vance leaned over the holographic display, smug satisfaction tightening the corners of his mouth. Around him, the command center buzzed with pride. They were watching victory unfold in real time. Only one person didn't celebrate. In the far corner, Master Sergeant Rostova watched a secondary monitor flicker with quiet intensity. Seismic readings, topographical overlays, wind and pressure data, things no one else in the room cared to read. Her eyes didn't leave the glowing lines of the gorge, the one marked in red. Her fingers twitched against the edge of the table, once, twice. Then she saw it. The convoy had begun its exfil westward. The red dot, the Cerberus tracker, was descending into the Alcashir Gorge. A single blinking light, steady, unaware. She didn't move at first, didn't breathe, just stared. Then she stood. General, she said, voice level measured. They're entering the gorge. Vance didn't look up. That's the plan, Sergeant. Her jaw flexed. The bridge will collapse under. Enough, he snapped. You've made your point. Around them, the staffers pretended not to notice the exchange. That's how arrogance hides, in silence and in fear of correction. Rostova lowered her eyes. Yes, sir. But the tone of her reply wasn't submission. It was acknowledgement, the way you acknowledge gravity before stepping off a cliff. She turned away. Her screen pulsed once more, seismic vibration from the gorge's mouth. Faint, rhythmic, deliberate, not natural, not wind. She froze. Then she whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, that's a detonation sequence. And then the feed blinked red. The first explosion didn't sound like an explosion. It sounded like the mountain exhaling. At Fob Nightingale, the monitors flared with motion alerts. On screen, dust and static replaced clarity. What the hell was that? Vance barked. Possible rock slide, a technician offered weakly. Rostova knew better. Her hand tightened around her radio headset. That's no slide, she murmured. The second explosion hit before anyone could breathe. This one was unmistakable, a deep, concussive roar that made the metal frames of the operations center tremble. On screen, two bright flares appeared near the canyon's center, then fire. The bridge. It was gone. Sir, shouted another tech, we've lost Cerberus One's feed. Vance's voice rose above the chaos. Get me visual, get me anything. But all they had left was a single blinking tracker, still and unmoving, caught in a storm of static. Back in the gorge, chaos ruled. Cade Miller's ears rang with a high-pitched whine that blotted out the world. Smoke choked the air. The first MRAP burned bright, the fire licking up into the sky like a pyre. Shrapnel had torn through his shoulder, hot metal and blood soaking his vest. He tried to move, but his arm wouldn't respond. "Echo," he shouted hoarsely. "Echo, report." From somewhere near the second vehicle, Tanaka's voice cracked through the static. "We're hit. We're hit bad." "Contact," someone screamed. And then the gunfire started. Not scattered, not panicked, precise. Dozens of green tracers slashed through the smoke, cutting into the convoy from both canyon walls. Mortars followed, their impacts staggering the earth. This wasn't a militia ambush. This was an execution. Dr. Thorne, the captured scientist, huddled inside the armored vehicle, eyes wide, trembling. He wasn't supposed to be here. None of them were supposed to die here. The bridge groaned beneath the surviving MRAP, the sound a long, drawn-out scream of metal under strain. Tanaka looked through the cracked windshield. The entire far side was sagging, concrete crumbling, steel supports bending like wet reeds. "We have to move," he yelled. "Where?" someone answered. No one had an answer. Above them, the cliffs spat muzzle flashes like fireflies. Every second, another round punched into the metal hulls. They were trapped in a kill zone, penned by their own confidence. The air reeked of cordite, blood, and the sickening tang of burning fuel. Miller fumbled with his rifle, pain blurring his vision. He looked down at the floorboard, at the puddle of his own blood mixing with sand. The thought came unbidden, cruel in its simplicity. The old woman was right. Inside the command center, panic replaced professionalism. Vance barked orders that no one could follow. "Get me air support." "Negative, sir," someone replied. "Comms are jammed full spectrum." "Then bypass it." "We can't, sir. They're gone dark." The red dot on the screen blinked weakly. Still. Then another tremor hit, seismic feedback, and the dot started to flash. Rostova's voice cut through the noise like a whisper through thunder. "They're trapped." Everyone turned toward her. She didn't shout, she didn't panic. Her face was stone. "I told you the bridge wouldn't hold." For a brief second, her voice cracked. Not from anger, from the weight of knowing she'd been right. And that rightness was now measured in blood. Vance's face flushed red, his fist slamming against the table. "This is not the time for." But she wasn't listening anymore. Her eyes were already back on her secondary screen, the one running independent drone telemetry. A feed she'd quietly routed through an off-grid relay 2 days ago, just in case. The jammer hadn't touched it. And there on that tiny flickering image, she saw them. Heat signatures, dozens on both ridges. She saw where the mortars were placed, where the spotters were hiding, where the escape should have been. Her breathing slowed, her mind stopped racing, everything became still. There was no time to ask permission. She turned, walked toward the door. "Master Sergeant," Vance shouted, "where the hell do you think you're going?" She didn't answer. Someone else called after her, "Ma'am, your post." But the door closed behind her. Outside, the sun was burning the last of the morning haze from the sky. She walked straight to the comms shack, boots crunching on gravel. Inside, she grabbed what she needed: a satellite phone, a PRC-117G radio, and a small black box the size of a paperback. A jammer buster. Then she went to the motor pool. Rows of gleaming armored trucks sat waiting, engines cold. But she ignored them. Her path led to the far corner, where an old desert patrol vehicle sat half disassembled under a tarp, forgotten by everyone but her. She pulled the tarp away, dust lifted like a ghost. "Come on," she whispered to the machine. "One more run." It wasn't pretty, it wasn't safe, but it was fast. 5 minutes later, the engine roared to life, coughing, then growling steady. Rostova loaded her pack, checked her sidearm, and drove out through a maintenance route no one else used. The guards at the gate didn't even see her, or maybe they did and decided not to stop her. The desert opened before her, a maze of ridges and sand, all the same color of death. The old service road she'd mapped days ago snaked into the horizon. She took it without hesitation. Every bump, every jolt hammered her spine, but her hands stayed steady. She didn't think about orders or consequences or the man shouting behind her. She thought about the soldiers bleeding in a gorge because no one listened. Dust whipped through the open cabin, biting her face. She blinked through it, eyes narrowed against the glare. Her body moved like it remembered the reflexes of a time she'd buried. The old training didn't fade. It just waited. She reached the plateau 20 minutes later, high ground overlooking the Alcashir Gorge. The valley below burned with gunfire and smoke. She killed the engine. Silence swallowed everything. Then she moved. She laid out a small canvas mat, unzipped the case from her pack. Inside, nestled in black foam, was the rifle, old, heavy, unassuming. The world might have forgotten it, but she hadn't. Her fingers moved over it like she was reuniting with a friend. Each click, each adjustment felt like breathing again after a long silence. The wind whispered through the rocks. She read it, felt it, adjusted. Through her scope the canyon came alive. Fire, movement, fear. The MRAPs were pinned. The men were trapped. Her jaw tightened. She sighted in, crosshairs on a spotter holding binoculars 950 meters out. Breathe in, half out, hold. Crack. The sound was soft, almost gentle. The spotter's head vanished into mist. His partner froze, and a heartbeat later fell the same way. She shifted, the mortar team next. 1,100 meters. Wind, elevation, pulse, all accounted for. She fired. The round hit the mortar tube itself. The explosion tore through the pit, sending smoke curling upward. Below, the fire slackened. Confusion spread. Her scope moved again, methodical, cold, patient. One by one, the heavy machine gunners fell. Then the man with the radio. Each shot was precise, controlled, absolute. When the last target dropped, she finally exhaled. Only then did she reach for her radio. She switched to Cerberus Squad's encrypted channel, bypassing the jamming with a precise burst of power. Her voice was steady, calm. "Cerberus, this is Archangel," she said. "I've opened your western flank. Pop smoke on my mark. Exfil route is compromised. Follow the dry riverbed north. I'll cover your withdrawal." For the men trapped below, it was like hearing an angel. "Who the hell?" Tanaka started, then stopped. The voice on the other end wasn't fear. It wasn't chaos. It was authority, the kind that only comes from absolute competence. At the base, technicians scrambled to isolate the signal. "Sir, I've got a transmission cutting through the jamming, patching it through." Vance leaned over the console, confusion twisting his face. "Archangel, this is command," he barked. "Identify yourself. Give me your real call sign." The line went quiet. A single suppressed shot cracked faintly through the speakers. Then her voice returned, colder than before. "Stand by." And somewhere in that desert wind, a legend began to wake again. Who was Archangel? The question echoed through the Tactical Operations Center like a gunshot in a cathedral. Every technician froze. Screens flickered with static and satellite readouts, but no one moved. Even the hum of the generators seemed to hold its breath. General Thern Vance stood at the center, face taut, veins standing out at his temples. His voice cracked like a whip. "Find me that signal. Who the hell is operating out there?" No answer, just silence, the kind that weighs more with each passing second. Then a single word came through the radio again, quiet, clipped, and absolute. "Stand by." Another muffled crack followed, the soft, surgical cough of a suppressed rifle. Then two more. On the big screen, thermal signatures inside the canyon began to vanish one by one. Red heat blooms winked out like dying stars. "She's taking them out," whispered a young comms operator. Vance leaned closer to the screen, eyes wide. "Who?" "Colonel Davies, the quiet man buried in intelligence files, was already typing furiously at his console. His hands shook as he navigated encrypted directories Vance had never bothered to read. He'd heard that voice before long ago, in a different war, under a different flag. He hoped he was wrong. The room filled with tension, so thick it could be heard. Then Davy stopped typing, his face drained of color. He turned toward the general, his mouth dry. "Sir, the emergency support call sign for this Operation Archangel. It's assigned to Master Sergeant Elena Rostova." Vance stared at him. The name hung in the air like smoke. "That's impossible," he whispered. "She's a logistics NCO." Davies swallowed hard. "Not originally, sir. Before she was reassigned, her classified service record lists another designation." He hesitated, his voice dropping to a tremor. "Call sign Ghost Viper." The words landed like a blow. Every head in the room turned. Even the machines seemed to pause. Vance's face went ashen. He had heard the legend everyone in command had. The Cold War ghost. The sniper whose missions didn't exist on paper, who appeared where death was silent and left nothing but clean reports and closed coffins. She was myth and rumor, a bedtime story for the kind of men who thought fear was beneath them. But myths didn't talk over open channels. On the speakers, her calm voice returned. "Command, this is Ghost Viper. Cerberus is moving. Cover me on relay frequency 27 Bravo." She hadn't asked for permission. She was giving orders. And somehow everyone obeyed. Vance lowered himself into his chair, hands trembling. "My God," he muttered, "what have I done?" Down in the canyon, Cerberus' squad staggered through dust and flame. The bridge behind them had collapsed into a broken jaw of twisted rebar. The dead lay scattered across the rocks, their pride buried beneath smoke. Tanaka moved first, dragging the wounded Ares Miller by his harness. "Let's go move," he shouted. A bullet struck the dirt inches from his boot. He flinched, then another voice filled his headset, calm, surgical. "Two shooters on the east ridge, 10-degree offset from your current heading. They're blind to your 6. Move now." Tanaka didn't question. He signaled and they bolted for the dry riverbed. Behind them, 2 single suppressed shots whispered through the canyon, and the gunfire ceased. He didn't know who she was, but her words were the difference between life and nothing. Dr. Thorne stumbled along, coughing, half delirious. Miller groaned, blood soaking his sleeve. The rest of the squad, bruised, burned, shell-shocked, followed the voice that seemed to know everything before it happened. They moved when she said move. They stopped when she said stop. They trusted her like soldiers trust instinct. For Tanaka, that voice was not command. It was survival itself. Back at the base, the control room had fallen into reverent quiet. Vance leaned on the console, eyes locked on the satellite feed. "Patch me through," he whispered. "Sir." "Direct line." The comms tech nodded, routing the channel. Vance pressed the headset to his ear. "Ghost Viper, this is command," he said, his voice brittle. "Confirm identity." Static answered him, then a slow, deliberate breath. "You don't need confirmation, General," she said. "You just need to listen." Her tone carried no malice, no satisfaction, only exhaustion, the kind that comes from fighting too long in a world that keeps repeating its mistakes. Vance swallowed. "They told me you were dead." "Then maybe you should have left me that way." He had no reply. The shame hung heavy, unseen but suffocating. On the monitors, more enemy signatures disappeared. One after another, it was surgical, beautiful, terrifying. Vance finally whispered, "Why are you doing this?" Rostova's answer was simple, "Because someone has to." On the cliffs above, Elena adjusted her scope. Sweat trickled down her temple. The wind had shifted 12 knots from the northwest. She adjusted 2 clicks left, half-breath squeeze. Another target dropped. She worked without emotion, her face a mask of calm resolve. Through her scope she could see the soldiers below, Miller stumbling, Tanaka dragging him, the scientist gasping through dust. She could see the fear, the disbelief. They were learning the hardest lesson war ever taught, that arrogance kills faster than bullets. "Cerberus," she said softly into the mic, "cross the shallow point in the riverbed. Ground stable there. You've got 5 minutes before they regroup." Tanaka's voice came back hoarse. "Copy Arch, Ghost Viper." He hesitated, tasting the words. "Ma'am, how do you know all this?" Her tone softened, almost like a memory bleeding through steel. "Because I've been here before." Then another shot cracked, ending the conversation. The desert wind carried the smell of fire to her perch. She ignored it, focusing instead on the pattern of the fight. The ambushers weren't retreating, they were repositioning, coordinated, intelligent. Someone was commanding them. She scanned the ridges until she found him, a man standing behind a makeshift antenna, issuing hand signals. A leader. "Target confirmed," she murmured. She calculated distance, adjusted elevation. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. For a brief moment, her mind wandered not to fear, but to memory. A younger Alina, hidden in snow. A different war. A target whose name she never learned. The weight of a trigger that never got lighter no matter how many times she pulled it. She blinked the memory away. Breathe in, half out. Crack. The man fell. Below, confusion erupted in the enemy ranks. Cerberus moved. She shifted positions, crawling to a second vantage point. Her knees ached, her lungs burned, but her focus never faltered. For every footstep the squad took, she was there, one eye in the scope, one ear on the wind. Every time a new gun opened fire, it went silent seconds later. Every time panic threatened to swallow the wounded men below, her calm voice guided them through it. "Left turn, 30 meters ahead, low ridge. You're clear for 10 seconds, move." And they moved. In the operations center, no one spoke anymore. They just listened to the quiet, deliberate rhythm of her voice. When she said move, they held their breath. When she said clear, they exhaled. The myth had become command reality. Colonel Davies broke the silence. "Sir, what do we do?" Vance stared at the radio. His voice came out low, raw. "We let her finish." He looked older now, smaller. The weight of arrogance had found its target. On screen, the satellite feed showed Cerberus advancing, slowly, painfully, toward the dry northern riverbed. Behind them, enemy fire dwindled into silence. Then came her final transmission, each word steady as stone. "Command, this is Ghost Viper. Cerberus is clear of the gorge. Extraction point to follow. Recommend immediate medevac and QRF intercept for remaining hostiles." Vance swallowed the lump in his throat. "Copy that," he said quietly. But she wasn't done. Her voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "Next time, General, listen when the quiet ones speak." Then the channel went dead. Down in the canyon, Cerberus' squad collapsed beside the dry riverbed, their lungs burning, uniforms torn and blood-stained. The scientist wept quietly against a rock, his face gray with shock. Tanaka looked up at the cliffs, eyes scanning the ridges where the shots had come from. Nothing. No movement, just wind and dust. He keyed his mic. "Ghost Viper, this is Cerberus. We're out. You saved our asses down here. We owe you." The line crackled with static, then silence. She was gone. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly, quiet and golden under the morning sun. Somewhere up there, an invisible guardian packed her rifle and walked away. Miller stirred beside him, voice barely audible. Was that her? Tanaka nodded slowly. Yeah. He looked back at the shattered bridge, at the smoke still rising from their pride. That was her. He didn't know the whole story. He didn't need to. All he knew was that someone the world had dismissed had just saved what was left of it. At the base, General Vance stood alone after the chaos had settled. The operations center was quiet now, screens dim, air heavy with the scent of burned circuits and fear. He stared at the empty chair Rostova had occupied just hours ago, the one he'd mocked, ignored, dismissed. Ghost Viper, he whispered under his breath almost reverently. The name felt like both a confession and a curse. He'd sent men to die, she'd gone to save them. And for the first time in his long career, Vern Vance understood what power really was: not command, not rank, not fear. It was competence. The kind that speaks softly, works quietly, and doesn't need to be heard to be obeyed. Outside, rotors thundered in the distance, the medevac team arriving on the horizon. He straightened his uniform and whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "Sometimes, the loudest one in the room is the most useless." He turned toward the landing field, the wind whipping his coat, dust swirling around him like ghosts. Somewhere in that wind, he thought he heard her voice again, low and distant. Ghost Viper out. Why did silence feel heavier than gunfire? The helicopters came late, too late for the men who'd believed they couldn't die. By the time the first Blackhawks appeared over the ridge, the smoke had thinned to a faint gray ribbon rising from the gorge like incense from a battlefield altar. Cerberus' squad waited in the dust. No formation, no discipline left, just a handful of bloodied, hollow-eyed soldiers clinging to the knowledge that they were still breathing. The whump-whump-whump of approaching rotors washed over them like a heartbeat returning after a long pause. Tanaka shielded his eyes against the sun. His uniform was torn, crusted with mud and blood. His arms ached from dragging bodies. He didn't remember how many he'd carried anymore or whose. Miller sat propped against a rock, his left arm wrapped in a makeshift bandage that had long since turned red. His face was pale, lips cracked, eyes sunken. But he was alive, and for the first time he didn't look invincible. He just looked human. "Hey," Miller croaked, voice weak, but still wearing that familiar edge of arrogance, an echo of who he'd been. "You hear that? Ride here." Tanaka didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the horizon behind the helicopters, on the cliffs that framed the gorge. He'd spent 2 hours listening to that calm voice guide them through hell. He couldn't leave without seeing where it came from. But there was nothing up there, just dust, wind, and heat haze. The first helicopter flared, kicking up a storm of sand that stung their faces and painted the air gold. The medics poured out, shouting, running, triaging, controlled chaos moving with purpose. And behind them stepped General Vern Vance. His presence cut through the noise like a blade through fabric. The same man who had mocked, dismissed, and ignored, now standing on the field he had created. His uniform was immaculate, but his eyes were sunken. There was something broken behind them, something that even rank couldn't hide. He said nothing, he just looked. At the vehicles mangled, smoking. At the bridge gone. At the soldiers battered shadows of what they had been hours before. He watched the medics load the wounded, his jaw working soundlessly. Orders would have sounded obscene in that silence. Then, from the edge of the rocks above, something moved. A small figure stepped out of the mirage, alone, steady, carrying a rifle that looked older than the war itself. Master Sergeant Alina Rostova descended the slope with calm, deliberate steps. She wasn't rushing, wasn't striding. She moved like someone who had all the time in the world, someone who had seen too many versions of this same story and knew that endings never changed, only faces did. The soldiers noticed her first. Tanaka saw her silhouette resolve against the light, small, gray-haired face streaked with dust. He blinked, hardly believing it. Miller squinted, wincing as the sunlight caught her profile. "No way," he whispered. The medics froze for a fraction of a second, as if the air itself shifted to make room for her. Rostova reached the bottom of the slope, her boots crunching softly on gravel. She slung her rifle low across her shoulder, the barrel still warm, faint traces of carbon smoke trailing from the suppressor. She walked straight past the stunned soldiers, past the medics, past the open ramp of the helicopter, until she was standing face to face with General Vance. For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind filled the space between them, carrying the smell of smoke and scorched earth. Vance stood rigid, but his eyes betrayed him. The man who once towered over every room now looked smaller in her shadow. He opened his mouth, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to command, but no words came out. Elena Rostova stopped a meter away from him. Her face was unreadable, gray eyes steady, calm as stone. For the first time since he'd taken command of this base, the general didn't know where to put his hands. His throat bobbed once, twice. Then slowly, he raised his right hand to his brow. The salute was slow, heavy. It wasn't for protocol, it wasn't for show, it was for penance. Rostova didn't move at first. Then, with a faint exhale, not a sigh, more like forgiveness given without words, she nodded once, barely perceptible. That was all. No speech, no reprimand, just acknowledgement. Because she understood something he was only now learning, that guilt doesn't need an audience, and forgiveness doesn't need a sound. Behind them, the soldiers of Cerberus watched in silence. Tanaka stood at the base of the ramp, helmet under his arm, face unreadable. He thought he understood respect. He hadn't, not until this moment. Without speaking, he raised his hand in salute. The motion was slow, deliberate, a quiet tribute not to rank but to truth. Then another soldier followed, then another. Soon every surviving member of Cerberus stood, bloodied, broken, exhausted, saluting the quiet, gray-haired woman who had walked into hell to pull them out. The desert wind caught their uniforms, flapping them like flags. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Rostova turned, giving the men a single look, not pride, not emotion, but recognition. She saw them as they were, not legends, not heroes, just survivors. She climbed the helicopter ramp. The rifle hung from her shoulder like an old memory that refused to die. As the rotors spun faster, dust swirling into a storm, Vance remained where he stood, hand still raised in salute. His expression was that of a man finally seeing the cost of command, and realizing too late that obedience isn't leadership. Rostova didn't look back. She didn't need to. When the helicopter lifted off, Tanaka watched her through the haze, his heart caught somewhere between shame and awe. Miller, still pale, whispered over the thrum of the blades, "That's her, isn't it? The ghost viper." Tanaka nodded slowly. "Yeah." He glanced at his bloodied hands, flexing them absently. "She's real." The words hung there, quiet, reverent, disbelieving. The helicopter banked east, the rising sun igniting its frame in gold. For a moment, Rostova's silhouette was visible through the open door, small, still, unshaken. Then the dust swallowed her and she was gone. Hours later, the base was a different world. The adrenaline had drained from its veins, leaving behind silence and paperwork. Soldiers whispered in corners, rumors spreading like wildfire. The supply clerk, the ghost, the one they said was dead. The med tent overflowed with wounded. The air was thick with antiseptic and exhaustion. Outside, the sky glowed orange as the day began to die. Inside his office, General Vance sat alone. The room that once felt powerful now felt like a confession box. He replayed the mission data on loop. Every frame, every second, every warning he'd ignored. His reflection in the monitor looked like a stranger, a man hollowed out by the weight of his own certainty. A knock came at the door. "Enter," he said, voice hoarse. Colonel Davies stepped in, holding a small data tablet. "Mission report draft, sir." Vance didn't look up. "I assume it says it was a successful recovery." Davies hesitated. "Yes, sir, officially that's what it says." "And unofficially?" Davies' jaw clenched. "Unofficially, sir, it says we were saved by the one person we didn't trust." Vance let out a quiet breath, something between a sigh and surrender. "Keep it that way." Davies blinked, "Sir." Vance finally met his gaze. Don't rewrite it. Don't hide it. Let the record show who saved them. Let the next idiot who sits in this chair read it before he thinks he knows better than experience. Davies nodded, slow and silent. Yes, sir. When he left, Vance turned off the monitor. The room plunged into half-darkness. He stared at the empty wall ahead, at the space where command once lived and arrogance had died. Outside, somewhere beyond the perimeter, a single rifle report echoed faintly from the training range. It wasn't part of any scheduled drill, but Vance recognized the sound. It wasn't just a gun being fired. It was a ritual being kept. In the maintenance bay, lit by a single yellow bulb, Elena Rostova sat on a crate with her rifle disassembled before her. Each piece was laid out in perfect order: steel, oil, cloth. The barrel gleamed faintly under the weak light. Her hands moved with the precision of habit, wiping, cleaning, reassembling, not because the rifle needed it, but because her mind did. This was her prayer, her way of making peace with what she'd taken and what she'd saved. The door creaked behind her. She didn't look up. Footsteps slow, hesitant. Tanaka stood in the doorway, a bandage wrapped around his arm. For a long time he said nothing, just watched her work. She didn't acknowledge him. She didn't need to. Finally he spoke. I didn't thank you. Rostova didn't pause. You don't have to. He hesitated, then stepped closer. The smell of gun oil filled the air. Ma'am, back in the briefing room when the general mocked you. I remember. You didn't say a word. She finally looked up, her expression unreadable. Words wouldn't have changed anything. Tanaka swallowed. So you waited. Rostova's lips twitched, almost a smile. I always wait. People learn slower than bullets travel. He chuckled softly, the sound almost embarrassed. Guess we learned the hard way. Her gaze softened. That's the only way soldiers ever learn. He nodded, then unslung his own rifle, sat beside her. Without a word, he began to clean it. His motions were awkward, unrefined, but she didn't correct him. They worked in silence. The rhythmic scrape of brushes and the soft click of parts became a language of its own. Outside, the sun dipped below the mountains. The base grew quiet. In that small, dim-lit room, 2 generations of soldiers sat side by side, one finishing her war, the other finally beginning to understand what it meant. When the night settled fully, Rostova looked up from her work. The rifle lay complete before her, clean, silent, ready. She whispered into the stillness, not to anyone, not even to herself, but to the ghosts that always stayed close. Sometimes, she said quietly, dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The light flickered once, then steadied. Outside, the desert wind blew through the perimeter fence, carrying with it the faint, haunting echo of a call sign that would live longer than any name. Ghost Viper. What makes a legend choose to disappear? Long before the dust of Fob Nightingale ever settled on her boots, Elena Rostova had lived another life, one that didn't exist in official files, only in whispers passed through shadowed corridors and nameless bars. The younger ones called her a myth. The older ones, the ones who knew, never used her name aloud. They called her Ghost Viper. The name was born in silence, not from medals or speeches, but from the kind of operations that never reached paper, places that didn't officially exist, targets that were never alive to argue. In her 20s, Elena had been the quiet one in a room full of men who thought noise was a weapon. She learned early that silence was deadlier. She spoke little, moved less, and hit every shot she ever took. She had a gift, not just the precision of a marksman, but the patience of a hunter. The kind of stillness that made men nervous because they couldn't tell if she was waiting or deciding. Her first mission was in a frozen country that denied she was ever there. A hostage extraction turned bloodbath. She'd been a backup sniper, expendable. When her team was pinned, command ordered a retreat. She stayed, alone. They found her 3 days later, the hostages alive, the captors all dead. That was the day they gave her a call sign. Ghost Viper. She didn't ask for it, she didn't like it, but names once given have a way of sticking harder than scars. The years that followed blurred into a cold procession of orders and kills. She didn't talk about what she did, she just did it, and every mission she completed made her both more valuable and more expendable. The brass loved her efficiency. The politicians loved her invisibility. The enemy never saw her coming. But something inside her began to rot. The precision that once steadied her now hollowed her out. The silence she'd mastered became too comfortable, a place to hide from herself. There was one mission that broke her. It wasn't the bloodiest or the hardest, just the one that asked too much of her humanity. It happened in a desert not unlike Al-Kashir, another forgotten war, another strategic necessity. She was tasked with eliminating a local warlord, easy shot, long range, clean exfil. But there was a variable no one told her about. The warlord's family. They built their compound in a way that shielded them, unless you were looking from a certain angle. She found that angle, and when she pulled the trigger, the bullet didn't stop where it was supposed to. It went through him, into the wall, through someone else. A little girl, maybe 6, maybe 7, she never found out. The silence after that shot was different. Not the calm before, not the calm after, the kind that echoed. When she returned to base, they debriefed her, handed her another mission, told her it wasn't her fault. But the next time she looked through a scope, her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She finished the mission anyway, but when it was done, she didn't report back to her unit. She walked straight to her commanding officer's tent, placed her rifle on the desk, and said 3 words. "I'm done, sir." He stared at her for a long time, then laughed, not cruelly, but with that tired resignation of someone who'd seen too many ghosts walk out. "You don't get to quit, Rostova," he said. "You just fade out." And that's exactly what she did. She faded quietly, intentionally. They reassigned her to logistics support under a new identity. It wasn't punishment, it was burial. No ceremony, no discharge, just silence. And for years, she lived that way, invisible, forgotten, a ghost haunting supply chains and cargo manifests. It suited her. It let her pretend she wasn't still listening to the echo of that single wrong shot. She never touched a sniper rifle again. Until the canyon. That night in the maintenance bay, after the battle, the memory wouldn't leave her. It always came back after a fight. The face she never saw, the one she'd taken without intent. She sat alone under the dim bulb, eyes fixed on the rifle laid out before her. The weapon had saved lives today, the same kind of tool that had once destroyed them. She thought she'd made peace with that contradiction, but tonight it felt sharp again. The door creaked. Tanaka stepped in, hesitant as always. "Ma'am couldn't sleep." "I don't," she said simply. He walked closer, glancing at the rifle on the cloth. "It's an old model. You've kept it in perfect condition." Her eyes didn't leave the weapon. Some things you keep because you need them, others because you owe them. He sat across from her, wincing as his ribs protested. "You were Ghost Viper," he said softly, not as a question but as an acknowledgement. She didn't answer. "You were real." Her gaze flicked up. "Everyone's real, Sergeant. Some of us just prefer to be forgotten." He nodded, absorbing the words, then said after a pause, "When I heard your voice over the radio, I thought it was command at first, but you didn't sound like them. You sounded calm," she finished for him. He nodded. She looked down again. "Calm doesn't mean fearless. It just means you've run out of ways to be afraid." The simplicity of it hung in the air. Tanaka shifted, uneasy. "Why did you come back? You could have stayed at the base. You didn't have to go down there." She smiled faintly, not warm but weary. "Someone had to." "That's not an answer." No, she agreed, it's not. The silence between them stretched, filled with unspoken things. Finally, she said quietly, do you know why soldiers like your general lose men? Tanaka frowned, because they make bad calls. Because they mistake volume for leadership, she said. The louder a man talks, the less he hears. He chuckled, then stopped when he saw she wasn't joking. Rostova continued, you can't command men through pride, only through truth. And truth isn't loud, it whispers. You either listen or you bury it. She began to reassemble the rifle again, the motions automatic. The sound of metal sliding into place was the only rhythm in the room. Tanaka watched her for a while, then asked, do you regret it, the life before this? She paused halfway through locking the bolt. Every part of it, she said, and none of it. He tilted his head. That makes no sense. Good, she said softly, then you're still young. He smiled faintly at that. Outside, the desert was still. The base generators hummed in the distance, a low, constant heartbeat. Rostova looked toward the door, her eyes distant. You know, once I used to think the world needed saving. That's what they told us, every operation, every bullet, it was always for saving something. And now, Tanaka asked. Now I think the world just needs witnesses, people who don't look away. She cleaned the last piece of the rifle and set it down. That's what soldiers really are, witnesses, to failure, to pride, to courage, to loss. Tanaka nodded slowly, understanding in pieces, and to redemption. She met his eyes, something almost human flickering there. If we're lucky. Later, when Tanaka left, she remained seated in the same spot. The bulb flickered once, humming softly. She reached into her breast pocket and pulled out an old photograph, worn, frayed at the edges. A child's drawing, faded and nearly torn in half. A stick figure, a house, a sun. Scrawled in a child's handwriting at the bottom were words in another language, unreadable except for the name Elena. She traced it with her thumb. Her face softened, but only for a moment. Then she folded it, slipped it back into her pocket, and exhaled. The sound was so quiet it barely disturbed the air, but it carried more weight than words ever could. The ghosts of her past were quiet tonight, for now at least. In the command office, General Vance stared at his own reflection in the dark window. He hadn't slept, couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the canyon again, the fire, the broken bridge, her face when she stepped out of the dust. He finally muttered to himself, they never retire, do they? Davy's voice came from behind him. The good ones never do, sir. They just change wars. Vance turned, half smiling. And what war is she fighting now? The quiet kind, Davies said. The one no one writes about. At dawn, the maintenance bay was empty. The mat was rolled up. The rifle case was gone. Only a folded slip of paper sat on the workbench, weighed down by a single spent casing. Tanaka found it first. He unfolded it, reading the neat, precise handwriting. You'll know you've become a real soldier when you stop trying to sound like one. ER. He looked down at the casing, the faint engraving near its base. An old symbol, a viper coiled around a pair of wings. He smiled faintly. Ghost viper, he whispered. The morning sun spilled through the windows, cutting across the dust motes in shafts of gold. The war was over. But legends, the real ones, never end. They just move to quieter places. How fast does a secret become a legend? At Fob Nightingale, it took less than a week. No one said her name aloud, not officially, but everyone knew. The whispers moved faster than orders, carried by mess hall chatter and late-night radio static. The supply clerk who vanished into the desert. The woman who saved Cerberus' squad from a massacre. The ghost with the calm voice that cut through chaos. They called her ma'am now, even soldiers who'd never seen her. It wasn't respect born of rank. It was reverence born of awe, the kind that turns a person into a story. But Elena Rostova, never wanted to be a story. She moved through the base like before, silent, invisible, methodical. She restocked supplies, signed manifests, cross-checked routes. The same work, the same uniform, the same calm expression. But the eyes that followed her were different now. When she entered the mess hall, voices hushed. When she passed the range, conversation stopped. The same men who'd mocked her now straightened unconsciously, as if her gaze alone could measure them. She hated it. Not the attention, the misunderstanding. They thought she was invincible, but legends always erase the blood, the mistakes, the weight. And Alina had never forgotten weight. One afternoon, as she reviewed convoy reports in her tent, a young private entered hesitantly, holding a clipboard. He couldn't have been older than 20. His face was pale with the kind of earnest fear that comes from facing someone you've only heard about in rumors. "Ma'am," he stammered, "the quartermaster asked for your approval on the new resupply route to Outpost Delta." She took the clipboard without looking up, her pen scratched across the paper. "Who planned the route?" Logistics division, ma'am." "Which one?" He swallowed. "Route Viper." The pen froze mid-stroke. She looked up slowly. "Route Viper." He nodded, confused. "Yes, ma'am, they said it's the fastest. The bridge has been rebuilt." Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did, a flicker, a shift. "Tell them to reroute through the northern path," she said quietly. "But ma'am—" "Tell them," she repeated, her tone still soft but carved from steel, "that the bridge doesn't remember who built it. It only remembers who fell." The private blinked, unsure what she meant, but he nodded quickly and left. When the flap closed behind him, she sat in silence. Outside, wind rattled the canvas, the same mountain wind that had carried screams and smoke not long ago. She whispered under her breath, "Not again." That evening she found herself standing near the perimeter fence, watching the horizon bleed into night. The desert was quiet now, too quiet. No convoys, no gunfire, just wind, stars, and the distant thrum of generators. Tanaka found her there. He'd healed enough to walk without a limp, though his arm was still bound in a sling. His face carried the same humility it had since the canyon, a man forced to grow up in a single day. "Didn't expect to find you here," he said softly. "You always say that," she replied without turning. He smiled faintly. "You always are." For a while they just stood there, two silhouettes framed by wire and fading light. Finally Tanaka broke the silence. "People are talking, you know, about you." "I'm aware. They're saying you were part of something big. Black ops, covert divisions, maybe even intelligence." "Rumors keep soldiers entertained," she said. He chuckled. "They keep them inspired too." She turned to face him, her gray eyes sharp but not unkind. "Inspiration is dangerous, Sergeant. It makes people think they're untouchable." "Maybe," he said, "but sometimes they need something to believe in." She looked past him toward the darkening desert. "Believe in competence. It lasts longer than faith." He smiled, but there was sadness in it. "You really don't like being called a hero, do you?" Her lips twitched. "Heroes get parades, soldiers get ghosts." The wind shifted, carrying sand that glittered faintly under the first rise of stars. 2 days later, an unexpected convoy rolled into Nightingale. The vehicles were cleaner, newer, not part of their regular supply chain. A small escort of military police surrounded a black personnel carrier with no insignia, the kind that meant official business no one would discuss. When the doors opened, 2 officers stepped out. One wore the dull gray of Intelligence Command, the other the crisp uniform of Central Operations Command. Rostova watched from a distance, half hidden behind stacks of crates. She already knew what it meant. Someone somewhere had noticed her again. The officers went straight to General Vance's office. The meeting lasted an hour. Then Vance stepped out, his face tight, his eyes searching. He found her where he knew she'd be, at the firing range, inspecting the weapon racks. "Master Sergeant," he said quietly. She didn't look up. "Sir. They want you back." The words hung there, flat but heavy. "Who they, sir?" He hesitated. "The Directorate, Black Section." Her hand stilled over the weapon rack. "I didn't think that existed anymore." "It doesn't officially." She exhaled slowly. "And what do they want?" "A consultant position. Counterinsurgency logistics." She looked up then, meeting his eyes. "That's a cover." He nodded once. "Yes." The silence stretched between them. "You're not ordering me," she said finally. "No," he said, "I'm asking." She studied him for a long moment. The man who'd once mocked her now looked like someone trying to repay a debt he couldn't describe. "I don't go back," she said softly. "You know that." Vance's jaw tightened. "They'll send someone else if you don't." "Then they'll die," she said without hesitation. He sighed. "Probably." The honesty in his tone made her pause. Finally she said, "What's the mission?" Vance handed her a sealed file. "Operation Firebreak." She didn't open it. Not yet. She just stared at the folder, the weight of 1,000 past sins condensed into one word. "Why me?" she asked. He hesitated, then said quietly, "Because you're the only one who still knows what silence costs." That night she sat alone in her tent. The folder lay unopened on the table. Outside, soldiers laughed somewhere near the barracks, the sound of youth that still believed in clean wars and quick endings. She envied them. When she finally opened the file, the contents were as familiar as they were damning. Maps, surveillance images, intercepted transmissions, casualty reports. Another region, another boiling point, another mountain range that would chew up soldiers and spit out silence. Halfway through, she stopped reading. Her hands trembled slightly. She pressed her palms flat on the table until the shaking stopped. Then she whispered to the empty tent, "Not again." But orders, even the ones you refuse, have a way of finding their mark. The next morning, Tanaka found her standing beside a transport truck, gear already packed. "You're leaving?" he asked, disbelief in his voice. She nodded once. "Where?" "Nowhere official." He frowned. "You're going back out there, aren't you, after everything?" She looked at him, the same calm gaze that had once silenced a general. "Sometimes the only way to end a cycle is to walk back into it." "That doesn't make sense." "It will," she said quietly, "someday." He shook his head. "You don't owe them anything." "I'm not going for them." "Then for who?" Her expression softened. "For the ones who'll be there next time, the ones who don't know what waits for them." Tanaka swallowed hard. "Then at least take someone with you." "I don't work with partners." He stepped closer. "Maybe it's time you did." The line made her pause. There was something in his voice, conviction, not arrogance, the kind of courage that grows only after failure. She studied him for a moment, then sighed. "You'll regret it." "Probably," he said, grinning faintly, "but at least I'll learn something." That earned the smallest ghost of a smile from her. When they left at dawn, the convoy was small, unmarked vehicle, few soldiers, fewer words. As the sun rose, the base fell behind them, shrinking into a dust-hued blur. Rostova sat in the passenger seat of the lead truck, staring out at the horizon. Tanaka drove, quiet but alert. "New war?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "Same war, different lies." The wind howled through the open window. The desert stretched endlessly before them, golden, cruel, indifferent. And somewhere beyond those dunes waited another mission, another failure, another chance at redemption. But for now, there was only the road, the sound of the engine, and the voice of a woman who'd once been a legend, now just a soldier again, trying to find peace in a world that didn't remember how. She looked out at the sun climbing higher, its light cutting sharp across the earth, and whispered something only the wind could hear. Let them tell their stories, I'll keep the truth. How many times can a soldier live the same mistake? The convoy moved through the low mountains of Saran province, engines humming against the wind's hollow song. The desert had given way to jagged ridges now, stone, dust, silence. The kind of silence that always came before something went wrong. Rostova sat in the passenger seat, eyes hidden behind dust-coated glasses, scanning the terrain like it was an old enemy. Tanaka drove, his hands steady on the wheel, but his shoulders betrayed the tension he tried to hide. They'd been on the road for 6 hours. No chatter on comms, no air cover. Just coordinates, a mission brief, and the unspoken knowledge that this was not a sanctioned operation. 2 more clicks, Tanaka murmured, glancing at the navigation pad. After that, it's all dirt. Rostova nodded absently, her gaze distant. That's where it starts. He looked at her confused. What starts? She didn't answer, she didn't need to. The road narrowed, curling through a canyon of broken stone. The air grew heavy, and beneath that stillness there was a sound, faint, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Tanaka frowned. You hear that? Yeah, her hand moved to her rifle. Brake now. The vehicle screeched to a halt. Dust swirled around them. For a second everything was still. Then she heard it, the telltale metallic click. Her instincts screamed before her mind could catch up. Out, she snapped. They dove from the truck as an explosion ripped through the canyon. The blast hit like a hammer, tossing sand and flame into the air. Shrapnel whined past their heads. Tanaka hit the ground hard, the world spinning. When the ringing in his ears faded, he heard her voice steady, cutting through chaos like a lifeline. Ambush, stay low, 3 o'clock ridge. He rolled to his stomach, spotting movement, figures in the rocks, muzzle flashes. Rostova was already moving. Calm, precise, her rifle tucked into her shoulder, eyes narrowing through the scope. She fired once, then twice. 2 flashes of light, 2 bodies slumping into silence. Tanaka ducked behind a wheel hub, returning fire. The echoes bounced off the canyon walls like ghosts screaming their names. Who are they? He shouted. Doesn't matter, she said, reloading with fluid precision. They're scared, that's enough. Scared of what? Of silence breaking back. The firefight dragged on minutes that felt like hours, but Rostova was methodical. Each shot measured, each movement efficient. There was no rage, no adrenaline, just calculation and control. When it ended, the canyon went quiet again. Smoke drifted between rocks like a sigh. Tanaka leaned back against the scorched vehicle, chest heaving. We walked right into it, he muttered. Rostova crouched beside him, scanning the ridges. No, someone walked us here. He looked at her, set up. Command doesn't leak by accident. She picked up a shell casing from the dirt, stamped with a mark she recognized. A black serpent coiled around a wing. Her breath caught. Tanaka noticed the change. You know that insignia? Her jaw tightened. I designed it. He blinked. You what? Black section, my old division. They're not supposed to exist anymore. He frowned. Then why are they ambushing their own? She looked at him, eyes hard as steel. Because the easiest way to erase a ghost is to burn what remembers her. They buried the dead in silence, no words, no ceremony. Just stones stacked over sand. Rostova watched the sun dip behind the ridge, the sky bleeding orange into violet. Why didn't you tell me? Tanaka asked quietly. Tell you what? That they were your people. They're not my people anymore. He studied her face, calm, but the kind of calm that hides a storm. You said this mission was about redemption. It was, she said softly, but redemption isn't given, it's taken. Tanaka exhaled. So what now? She looked at the burned-out truck, then at the horizon. We finish it the hard way. They walked the rest of the night, navigating by memory and starlight. The land was rough, the wind colder now. At dawn, they reached a small plateau overlooking a valley. In the distance, smoke rose from a small settlement, the target zone from the file. Through her scope, Rostova saw it clearly. Civilian structures, makeshift defenses, too many bodies that didn't look like soldiers. Her stomach twisted. Tanaka noticed her stillness. What is it? Look closer. He borrowed her scope and his face went pale. Those aren't combatants. No, she said bitterly, they never are. The mission file had described an insurgent cell, but what she saw was a refugee camp. Women, children, the elderly. It was a trap. A ghost from her past had drawn her here, using her name, her guilt, her instincts. She lowered the rifle. They want me to pull the trigger again. Tanaka's brow furrowed. Again. Her voice cracked for the first time. Years ago there was a mission, similar setup. I took a shot that shouldn't have been mine. He understood then, the silence, the shame, the reason she'd buried herself under logistics. So this, he said slowly, is their message. She nodded. They want to prove I'm still the same. Tanaka swallowed hard. So what do we do? Rostova's eyes hardened. We tell the truth. They approached the settlement under the cover of dusk and dawn. The people inside were terrified, scattered. They'd heard the gunfire, seen the smoke from the canyon. An old man with weathered eyes stepped forward, a rifle trembling in his hands. Who are you? He demanded in broken English. Rostova lowered her weapon and lifted her hands. Not your enemy. He didn't lower his gun. Everyone says that. She nodded slowly. Then let me earn it. He stared at her for a long time, then gestured for her to enter. Inside the camp, the air smelled of wood smoke and fear. Children hid behind crates. Women whispered prayers. Tanaka moved beside her, scanning the perimeter. They're waiting for another strike, he murmured. They'll get one, she replied, unless we change the story first. She pulled out a small transmitter from her pack, flipping switches, adjusting frequencies. Tanaka frowned. You're going to broadcast. Not us, she said, them. Within minutes, she had the camp's local frequency connected to the open military band. Then she handed the transmitter to the old man. Tell them who you are. Tell them where you are. Let them hear your voices. He hesitated. They'll kill us. They'll kill you anyway, she said softly. At least this way someone will know why. He looked at her for a long time, then spoke into the device. His voice shook, but it carried raw, human, undeniable. He named the camp, the families, the children, the truth. Rostova closed her eyes, listening. The same radio waves that once carried her orders now carried innocence. Signals strong, Tanaka said quietly. Command's definitely hearing this. Good, she said. Let them decide which ghost they believe in. The retaliation came fast, a drone on approach, low and silent. Rostova spotted it first, its shadow slicing across the ground. Down, she shouted, pulling Tanaka behind a wall. The drone fired once, a precision strike, but the targeting system hesitated, disrupted by the broadcast frequency. The missile hit wide, detonating harmlessly in the hills. She smiled faintly. Interference works both ways. Tanaka looked at her, astonished. You jammed it. I learned from the best, she said. Then I outlived them. She picked up her rifle again, scanning the horizon. The drone was circling back, its hum growing louder. Second pass incoming. Then we move, she said. They led the villagers into the ravine, pushing them toward natural cover. The children cried. The air trembled with noise and fear. Rostova moved like a shadow, one hand steadying a child, the other gripping her weapon. As the drone came in low again, Tanaka looked up. We can't outrun it. Rostova dropped to one knee, flipping her rifle's scope to manual range. We don't have to. Ma'am, that's impossible, she finished. He hesitated. Yeah. Then it's about time I did something impossible again. The drone swooped low, its sensors locking. Rostova's breath slowed. The world narrowed to a single sound, the hum of rotors and the beat of her own heart. She squeezed the trigger. One shot. The bullet struck the underside of the drone, not the body but the intake. A spark, a shudder, then a flash. The machine spiraled out of control, crashing into the sand 100 meters away. Tanaka blinked, stunned. How? She didn't answer. She just stood, exhaling softly. Never take the shot unless you can live with it. He stared at her. You think you can? She looked out over the valley, where smoke rose but no one was dead. This time, yes. As the sun rose higher, the camp was safe. The broadcast still echoed faintly over the comms, looping the same words. We are not combatants. We are alive. Tanaka turned to her. Command's going to lose its mind when they hear this. Good, she said quietly. Maybe it's time they remember what conscience sounds like. He looked at her, admiration and concern mixing in his eyes. You know they'll come after you for this, right? They already have, she said. She slung her rifle over her shoulder and looked toward the east. Come on. There's one last thing we need to do before they find us. And somewhere behind them, across static and broken channels, a voice crackled through the comms at command headquarters. This is General Vance. Patch me through to Ghost Viper. Why do legends end in silence? The transmission had barely ended when the desert sky filled with the sound of rotors. A dust storm swirled above the refugee camp, whipping sand into the air like rising smoke. The people crouched low, clutching one another, unsure if the sound meant rescue or retribution. Rostova stood in the open, rifle slung across her back, her gray hair whipped by the wind. Beside her, Tanaka squinted upward. They found us. She nodded once. That was the point. He glanced at her, uncertain. And if they're not here to help, then they'll have to look me in the eye when they decide. The first helicopter descended, kicking up a wall of dust. The doors slid open and General Vance stepped out. No insignia this time. No guards, no photographers, just him, eyes squinting through the grit. For a long moment, he and Rostova stood facing each other, the desert between them alive with noise. The soldiers behind him held their weapons ready but lowered them when he raised his hand. He walked forward slowly, boots crunching over the dry sand, until he stood just a few feet from her. You couldn't stay quiet, could you? He said, voice roughened by wind and regret. Rostova met his gaze without flinching. Silence isn't the same as peace, General. He gave a small, humorless smile. You went rogue. Hijacked a comm band, broadcast classified signals, compromised intel. Do you have any idea what that means? Yes, she said. It means someone finally heard the truth. Behind her, the villagers watched, nervous, afraid, waiting for the decision that would shape their fates. Vance looked past her at them, his expression unreadable, then back at her. You realize I could have you arrested right here. You could, she said calmly, or you could listen. He stared at her for a long time, then sighed. Always the same. You don't fight wars, Rostova. You corner people into remembering them. She didn't respond. The silence between them stretched, tense, human, old. Finally he spoke again, quieter this time. You saved them, but you broke every rule we have doing it. Her voice softened. Then maybe the rules are what's broken. That made him pause. For the first time there was no rank between them, just two soldiers who'd seen too much, carrying too many ghosts. Later, inside a makeshift tent at the edge of the camp, they sat across from each other. Tanaka waited outside, guarding the door, though everyone knew no threat remained. Rostova's hands rested on the table, still dust-streaked, nails blackened by sand. Vance's uniform was immaculate, but his eyes weren't. They looked like someone who hadn't slept in years. He broke the silence first. I read your file again after Al-Kashir. You should have been a colonel by now. I never wanted to be one. You could have changed things from the inside. No, she said quietly. You can't change rot by living in it. You have to walk outside the walls to see where they're cracking. He leaned back, watching her. And what happens when the walls fall? She looked up. Then maybe people stop pretending they're safe. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. You still see the girl, don't you? Her head tilted slightly. What girl? The one you told me about once, he said. The one from the desert, the one who wasn't supposed to be there. The faintest tremor crossed her face, gone almost as soon as it appeared. I thought that file was sealed. I'm the one who sealed it, he said. You think I didn't read it first? She looked away, jaw tight. That's why you picked me for Cerberus. He nodded slowly. I wanted to see if ghosts can still fight. And he studied her. They can, but only when they remember why they died. She said nothing. The wind outside howled softly against the tent canvas. After a moment, she reached into her pocket and slid a small object across the table. A folded piece of paper, creased and worn. He unfolded it carefully, recognized it instantly. The child's drawing. A son, a stick figure, the name Elena. He stared at it. You carried this all these years. It's lighter than guilt, she said. His voice broke around the edges. You think saving these people erases that? No, she said, but it means the next little girl gets to draw hers. Outside, Tanaka listened to the muffled conversation. He didn't understand every word, but he heard the tone, the weight of it. The sound of two people finally saying what soldiers never do. We were wrong. We're sorry. When Vance finally stepped out, the desert sun had dipped low, painting everything in gold. His face was unreadable again, but his salute, brief and silent, was different this time. He turned to his men. Stand down. These people are under our protection. No one questioned him. The rifles lowered. The tension melted into the wind. Rostova emerged a moment later, her rifle slung, her eyes distant. Tanaka approached quietly. You okay? Not yet, she said, but getting closer. He nodded. So that's it, we just walk away. She looked at the horizon. Walking away is harder than fighting, you'll learn. He half smiled. You always say that. And you never believe me. Not yet, he said. They left the camp before dawn. The helicopters stayed grounded. Orders had changed, Vance's doing, no doubt. As they crossed the first ridge, Tanaka looked back. Smoke from the campfires curled upward, faint against the rising light. Do you think command will cover it up? He asked. Probably, she said. That's what command does. Then why bother? She stopped, turning to him with that calm, steel-soft gaze. Because stories outlive orders. Someone will tell this one. He smiled faintly. Maybe I will. You already are, she said. They traveled light, no convoy this time. Just two rifles, a map, and the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. As the sun climbed, they reached an overlook above the valley. The wind tugged at her scarf, the fabric fluttering like an old flag. Tanaka sat on a rock, wiping sweat from his brow. You ever think about retiring, for real this time? She chuckled softly. I tried that once, didn't take. Then what'll you do now? She thought for a long moment, then said, keep teaching, quietly. Teaching what? She looked out over the endless sand. How to listen. Hours later, at command headquarters, Vance stood before a wall of screens. Advisors argued over reports, analysts replayed intercepted signals, and bureaucrats demanded explanations. He didn't give them one. Instead, he typed a single line into the official mission summary, before signing it and closing the file permanently. Operation Firebreak success. No casualties. Report closed by authority of General Vern Vance. Recommendation. Field commendation for M. SGTE Rostova classified. Then after a pause, he added one more sentence. Sometimes the quietest soldiers carry the loudest truths. He saved the file and walked out. Back in the desert, dusk arrived like an old friend. Rostova and Tanaka made camp under the open sky. The air was cool now, the fire small but steady. Tanaka poked the flames with a stick, glancing at her. "You ever wonder what they'll say about you?" She smirked faintly. "They'll say I was difficult." He laughed softly. "They already do." "Good," she said. "Means I did something right." He was quiet for a while, then asked, "If you could go back, would you change it, the shot?" Her expression turned inward, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, I'd still take it, but I'd remember her name before I did." The fire cracked. The stars bloomed overhead, vast and indifferent. Tanaka watched her silhouette against the glow. "You think people like us ever find peace?" She looked at him, eyes soft now, almost kind. "Peace isn't something you find, Sergeant. It's something you stop running from." He nodded slowly, letting the words settle. Later, when Tanaka finally drifted into sleep, Rostova sat alone, staring into the embers. She reached into her pocket, unfolded the same drawing, and laid it gently beside the fire. The heat licked the paper's edge, curling it inward. She watched it burn, not as an act of forgetting but of release. When it was gone, she whispered, "Rest now." The wind answered, brushing past like a sigh. She looked up at the stars, each one distant, each one silent. For the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. She closed her eyes. And for a moment, the world was still. At dawn, Tanaka woke to find the campfire cold, and a single casing resting where she'd sat. It was polished, gleaming faintly in the morning light, the same viper end wing insignia carved into its base. Beside it, a small note written in her precise hand. "For when you learn to listen more than speak." "Er." He smiled, slipped the casing into his pocket, and looked toward the east. The horizon glowed with the first light of another day. Somewhere out there, she was walking again, one more ghost choosing to stay unseen. And though no one at command would ever know her story, everyone at Nightingale would remember the same truth whispered between barracks walls and briefing tables. That the calm voice in the canyon was real. That silence could save lives. And that sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.